I'm here to talk about why we should be the soul food generation. But before I talk about that, I also want to give you guys a little bit of my soul food education. So I grew up in this little small town in Illinois called East St. Louis. I went to a Pentecostal black church where we had Sunday dinners every Sunday. And I have two Southern grandmothers, one from Jonestown, Mississippi, and the other from Somerville, Tennessee. So on Sundays, and any time we had something to celebrate, whether it's Christmas or Easter, or someone was getting married, or someone was getting a divorce, we got together. That's cause for celebration sometimes. So we would have a soul food dinner where, you know, we'd have everything that you could imagine soul food to be, right? So what do you imagine soul food to be? People always think of black culture when they think of soul food, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about soul food. Soul food at my house meant candied yams, right? Macaroni and cheese, cornbread, collard greens, and fried chicken, right? So we had all those things, but one of my grandmothers, she knew how to make some collard greens, y'all. Let me tell you about the collard greens that she used to make. She used to boil the collard greens in a pot of ham hocks, and the collard greens would be so limp by the time she's done. But they'd be so amazing because you had this water that they were in. It was all sopping wet, and so you had to dip this cornbread. And she didn't make it with Jiffy cornmeal. She made it from scratch with a whole stick of butter and some crazy ingredient of I don't know how much cornmeal. She would put it together, made this pot of cornbread, you took a slice and you dipped it in the green juice. The green juice from the collard greens. Catch up, y'all. And so you dip it in there, your cornbread is sopping wet, and you take a bite, and that was the meal, and it was amazing. She also liked to burn part of her chicken, her fried chicken, and we weren't used to that because my mom didn't fry her chicken like that, but my grandmother, she liked to burn one side of the fried chicken, and it was amazing because only she knew how to make it like that. Then I had a great aunt who made red velvet cake, and this was red velvet cake before it was really popular. So she used the real ingredients, not the food coloring stuff. She used like the red wine and the chocolate to make the red velvet cake happen. It was amazing. She would put like this icing on top that was all sugar, and then she sprinkled it with pecans, and it was amazing. It was great. Those were our soul food dinners. But also when we had soul food together, there weren't always food that was brought to the table. People brought other things to the table as well. They brought their worries, they brought their doubts, their fears. Sometimes they brought stories. They wanted to clear the air, or they wanted to set the record straight about something. And so in those moments, we had to have little fights, or we had to have little arguments, or we had to get through something together. But at the end, we had a better understanding of who we were. And because we were family, we continued to love each other. And we moved past that, and we had to, we knew how to come together and work these things out. So that was the basis of my soul food education. It really didn't come to fruition for me until much later, around 2009, when I lost my soul. I lost my soul after I came home from Uganda. I studied there the first time during undergrad. I spent 3 months there with 37 other students from Christian colleges and universities across the country and in Canada. And there, we studied alongside Ugandan students. And when I went to Uganda initially, I had this idea that I'd eventually become a missionary. I wanted to save some souls. I had these great ideas and expectations that when I got there, the Ugandan people were going to embrace me like the prodigal daughter who was returning back to the motherland. And I also had these great ideas that I would build these long-lasting relationships with these other Christian students who I studied there with from America. I was being very idealistic because what really happened was I got there to Uganda and I was an invisible minority. The Ugandan people really didn't see me because I looked so much like them, so a lot of times they thought I was Ugandan as well. And then the American students, while they had a heart for Africa, they really had a low tolerance for the black American girl with the big voice who, I have a big voice, the Black American girl with the big voice who, when we had conversations about social justice issues, I reminded them of the racial tensions that we lived in back here in the States. That was really challenging. So by the end of the 4 months that we were together, I felt alienated, of course. I felt silenced and bruised by all of these less than desirable experiences. So when I came back home from Uganda, I struggled a whole lot. And so I blamed a lot of things. I blamed the church I grew up in, which was an all-Black Pentecostal church. I blamed the church that I was attending right before I left for Uganda. It was a predominantly white Presbyterian church. I blamed imperialism. I blamed capitalism. I blamed a whole lot of systems, right? And in addition to that, I was turning 30 that year, and I had a breakup with this guy I was dating who I still loved, and I broke up with the church, and ultimately, I broke up with my faith. I separated from faith altogether, and at this time, I felt like I lost my soul. I tumbled into depression. I was in this season of doubt, and it set me on a path of soul searching, right? So in this season of soul searching, where I spent 3 years, I went home to be with my parents, told them I don't want to go back to Philadelphia. My home is in St. Louis with my parents, and I'm like, I don't want to go back to St. Louis. I want to spend a semester off. They wouldn't hear about it. They were like, forget that. So, I was a non-traditional student, so I was paying for my own tuition, so they didn't have their money wrapped up in my college tuition, but they had their hopes and dreams wrapped up in it, because I would be the first out of 5 kids and both my parents who would have graduated from college. So my father drove me back himself the weekend before classes started. But when I came back to Philadelphia, I also had to come back to my friends who had all of these questions about, what was I going through, I also had to come back, and I was at this Christian university that I was totally disenchanted with, and I had to find a way to navigate through being somewhere that I was totally disenchanted with. And then finally, I had this newfound pride about myself and my Black heritage, because I had been to Uganda, and while I didn't connect with the American Christians who I since separated myself with, I found that I had this great new identity in being a Black American with this African heritage. So I had these paradoxes going on. I didn't want to believe in Jesus, but I was in this Christian university. I wanted to be pro-Black, but I had all these great, diverse friends who I loved dearly. And I wanted to save the world, but I was pissed off at it, right? So what did I do? I decided that I was going to go into this cycle of talking to my friends and just being very open and honest about who I was. First, I had to be honest with myself. Who am I? What are my spiritual beliefs? What do I really believe in? What are my ambitions? I had to be honest about a lot of things about myself. And then I had to be honest with others. And what best way to do that than to sit down with people and talk about your differences? In today's culture, we are consumed with social media, Twitter, Facebook, and a lot of times I was connected with these people who I had these surface relationships with, and the only way I knew what they really felt was through these Facebook statuses and these tweets. And that was the only way I knew how they really felt. I didn't want that to be the basis of how I knew people. So I decided to go out and have dinner with my friends on a regular basis and really have these real soul-deep conversations. And it started with one of my friends who, her and I were both non-traditional students, and we were crazy. This was like the last couple years of school, and her and I were both working these crazy gigs. We were trying to get to know each other. We were working these crazy gigs to pay the rent, and we were also turning in papers, piecemealing papers together and turning them in on the day they were due. We were absolutely crazy. And so we went to different colleges, so we always had these scheduling conflicts, but she's very persistent. So one day, she shows up at my house where I lived with 4 other women, and she had IHOP takeout. So of course I let her in. We sat at the dining table in my dining room at my house. My housemates were all over the place. And we talked about everything under the sun. Her and I both studied in Africa at some point. So she's a black woman, I'm a black woman. We go to these, she was going to temple, I was going to Eastern. I had all these issues with, what happened to me in Africa and the school I was going to. And I talked about all of these things while my housemates were there. And later she said to me, Zenique, you know what? You know what was so striking about you that day? You talked about all these racial issues while your housemates were there. And I was like, yeah, girl, I'm about that life. But it is true. I am very open about how I feel about racial issues, about community issues, about my pro-blackness, which doesn't mean I'm a militant, by the way. It means I'm just pro-black. And I'm pro-community, though, too. But I have a lot of things to say, but I'm also very willing to listen. And I want, just as open as I am with my friends and the people who I love, I want them to be just as open with me. And I want to sit at the table, and I want to eat with them their version of soul food. At my house, where I lived with 4 women, there was a white woman, a Japanese woman, a black woman, and a Ukrainian woman. So we come from all over the place. And when Alicia sat down and sat in my house and we ate IHOP and they were all milling around, that she kind of got an idea, a sense of the culture in which I like to live and be honest about. So in today's culture, we are definitely immersed in this social networking, social media culture where we're seeing things and we can get a sense of people through those types of flashes on our screens all the time. But how do we create real community? How do we ensure that we're sitting down and we have more than these surface relationships? We're creating soul deep connections where we're understanding exactly who we're dealing with on a much deeper level. So, my talk is very short, but I want to encourage you to look at your friends who you've probably had for years, black friends, Japanese friends, Muslim friends, gay and lesbian friends, Christian friends, and have them sit down with you. And whatever your views are, if you have differing views across the board, can you still come together and love each other in spite of that? And in doing so, offer gentler criticisms, be considerate about how the other person feels, and act in those ways. Act with love at all times. You may want to sit at the table. You may want to go to their home in North Philly or their home in Westchester. And you may want to sit at their table and be a part of their meal, whether it's ramen noodles, soul fried chicken, or kimchi, or halal chicken. Whatever the meal is, sit down at the table, have a real heart-to-heart talk, create a soul-deep connection, and be a part of this soulful generation. Thank you so much.